When you look at Japan's skies, you'll see a multitude of airlines that are essentially brand extensions of airlines from other countries. One of those airlines in today's case is Jetstar Japan. My name's Ethan, and today we'll be diving into the history of Jetstar Japan. Before we dive into Jetstar Japan's history, we need to understand how their parent company, Jetstar, was established. Previously, Australia had similar tight regulations to Japan, with routes operated from state capitals being exclusively under Ansett and the government-owned TAA. This would severely limit domestic operations in Australia, with independent airlines being relegated to operating feeder services to the capitals. To coincide with domestic regulations, Qantas would be designated as the sole international carrier. With Europe and the US beginning to deregulate at the end of the 1970s and into the 1980s, Australia would begin their own moves towards the deregulated airline market. Around the same time as Japan's deregulations were taking place, Australia would lift the troublesome two-airline policy. Along with the two-airline policy, regulations in regards to fares would be lifted as well. The low-cost carrier service model, which had already begun to prove popular in Europe and North America, would begin to establish itself in Australia. One of these airlines would be Virgin's Australian offshoot, Virgin Blue. By 2002, TAA and Ansett would be no more, being casualties of the newly deregulated market. And as a result, a massive void would open up in the domestic market, which would lead to Virgin Blue growing exponentially. Qantas would see the success of Virgin Blue, and in turn, they'd launch their own low-cost carrier, which would end up being Jetstar. Jetstar would launch in 2003 and rapidly expand, and by the start of the 2010s, the airline would be well off, with offshoots in Singapore and Vietnam. Eventually, the Qantas group would set their sights on Japan in an attempt to capitalize on the growing Japanese market. However, Qantas couldn't just establish an offshoot of Jetstar in Japan. As outlined in Japan's Civil Aeronautics Act, foreign nationals could only control 1/3 of an airline's total shares, as well as the core management group needed to be Japanese. As a result, they were going to need a Japanese airline to assist. Luckily, Japan Airlines would agree to join the investment group, along with the Mitsubishi Corporation and Tokyo Century Leasing. As a result of their cooperation, Jetstar Japan would be announced on August 14th, 2011. Miyuki Suzuki would be appointed the company president, who had no previous airline experience. However, she worked at various companies around Asia. During the initial press release, Jetstar Japan would announce that they were to start operations by the end of 2012, using 3 brand new A320s and operating flights from Narita and Kansai to Sapporo, Nuchitose, Fukuoka, and Okinawa, with rapid expansion planning to have 24 A320s in the fleet by the end of the fiscal year of 2014. With Jetstar Japan being a part of the JAO group, Japan Airlines provided Jetstar Japan with maintenance, along with providing support and managing ticket sales. Jetstar Japan would apply and receive their air operator certificate in April 2012, and with that, they would announce that they would launch services ahead of schedule on July 3rd, 2012. The airline's first A320, registered Juliet Alpha 01 Juliet Juliet, would be received towards the end of April, with the remaining 2 A320s delivered in May and June respectively. Operations would begin as scheduled on July 3rd, with routing between Fukuoka and Narita, with Narita to Naha, Kansai, and Sapporo Nuchitose beginning less than a week later on the 9th. The Kansai hub would begin operating flights a month later on the 24th of August, with flights to Fukuoka and Nuchitose, with services to Naha beginning in October. In the airline's first 6 months of operation, they would carry over 600,000 passengers, with assumingly a high load factor. As a result of their success, new routes would be added with flights from Narita to Senshire, Kagoshima, and Ueda, along with routing from Senshire to Nuchitose, Fukuoka, and Kagoshima beginning in May 2013. Code sharing with Japan Airlines would begin as well, with further destinations being added with flights to Matsuyama from Narita during the summer of 2013, and Takamatsu during the winter season. With the increase of routes, additional aircraft would gradually join the fleet, with 13 aircraft in service by June 2013. Meanwhile, while Jetstar Japan was attempting to upgrade their Kansai facilities into a full-fledged base, it wasn't going too well. In particular, their maintenance was under scrutiny from the Japanese Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, MLITT for short, which wasn't up to their standards. Not only would this delay the opening of their Kansai base, but this would also cause them to ground 4 brand new A320s. By the end of the first full year of operations during the fiscal year 2013, they were the largest domestic low-cost carrier by fleet size and available seat kilometers in Japan, carrying a total of 2 million passengers. After years' delay, Jetstar's maintenance was up to the standards of the MLITT, which allowed them to open Kansai as a full-fledged base. As a result, overall capacity and frequencies and routes from Kansai would increase, along with adding services from Kansai to Ueda. By 2015, Jetstar Japan carried their 10 millionth passenger and had new routing from Kumamoto to Sentra, Kansai, and Narita, along with starting their first international route, Hong Kong from Kansai. Their 20th aircraft would also join their fleet and is looking on the up and up for Jetstar Japan. However, in the fiscal year 2014, by the way, the Japanese fiscal year runs from April 1st to March 31st, Jetstar Japan posted a loss of 11 billion Japanese yen, bringing their total losses up to over 20 billion yen since the airline's founding. As a result, Qantas and Japan Airlines provided cash injection for the airline, which would serve to stabilize the airline for the time being. However, the airline still continued to post losses. Jetstar Japan secured code sharing with American Airlines, Jetstar, and Qantas, along with further expanded code sharing with Japan Airlines around this time as well. Sentra would essentially become a full-fledged base by this time, with the addition of services to Naha from Sentra beginning in March 2015. CEO Miyuki Suzuki would resign in order to pursue a position with another company, which would result in Jetstar's manager of group operations, Gary Turner, being appointed to CEO. Services from Kansai to Ueda and Kumamoto along with Sentra to Kumamoto would be axed towards the end of 2015 and into 2016 in favor of the addition of flights to Taipei, Taiwan, and Manila from Narita, Kansai, and Sentra. Routing to Manila from Kansai would be dropped in July, only 4 months after beginning, whilst routing from Narita and Sentra to Manila would be paused and resumed in September. Jetstar Japan would also begin flights to Guangzhou and Shanghai Pudong from Narita and Kansai in November, and Jetstar Japan posted their first year of profitability during the fiscal year 2016. I also forgot to mention this, but Jetstar Japan partnered with Rovio, the guys who make Angry Birds, for a promotional livery in which Juliet Alpha 01 Juliet Juliet would have some of the main characters from the movie adorn the aircraft, but it would last from July until October, and then the livery would be unfortunately removed. As a result of reaching profitability for the first time, Qantas would fully support the airline, intending to increase its fleet up to 28 aircraft by the end of the fiscal year of 2019, in order to facilitate further expansion. Flights to Miyazaki from Narita would be picked up during 2017, which would be the only notable event of the year. 2018, on the other hand, would be a relatively busy year for the airline, with Jetstar Japan bringing back services from Kansai to Kumamoto. The airline would also do some charter work, picking up flights between Kochi and Miyazaki, along with adding scheduled flights to Nagasaki from Narita. Further scheduled flights to Shone and Shimojishima, holy shit, that took me like 3 tries, from Narita would be added during the 2019 season, which would be the last set of routes added heading into the pandemic years. Jetstar Japan would be given the title of designated air carrier in the latter half of 2019, which entitles them to recertify their pilots in-house under certain circumstances, rather than completely relying on the MLITT for pilot recertification. Japan Airlines would also buy out Mitsubishi's stake in Jetstar Japan at the end of 2019, which would give them a majority of the shares in the airline. As we're all familiar with, the pandemic would put a stop to air travel. As a result, Jetstar Japan would pause all international routes and some domestic routes. The airline would trudge through the pandemic years gradually, with 6 aircraft being repositioned by the Jetstar Group back to Australia in 2021. 3 A321neos would be received in 2022, ahead of travel restrictions being lifted in Japan. Also in 2022, Japan Airlines along with Yamato Holdings announced that they'd be launching cargo flights with A321 covered freighters in 2024. And while Jetstar Japan would be reported as the operator, it would be decided that Spring Airlines Japan would operate the flights. Jetstar Japan would gradually begin resuming routes, with all the routes previously operated being fully up by mid-2024, with the exception of services to Hong Kong, which wouldn't be brought back. Services from Narita to Asakawa would be launched in December 2023, along with Fukuoka to Sapporo in March 2024. The final notable event to date would be the closure of Jetstar Asia in July 2025, with Jetstar Japan slated to receive 6 aircraft once the Singapore branch closed. That wraps up today's history of Jetstar Japan, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, share, all that shit. Anyways, peace.